previously recorded online session is brought to you by the Pennsylvania State Association of Boroughs. For more information on PSAB's educational offerings, statewide advocacy efforts, and cost-saving programs, please visit our website, www.boroughs.org. Thanks for watching.
Well, folks, I see it is 12 noon, so why don't we get the webinar kicked off here. I just want to welcome everyone to our session on economic development financing tools. Glad to have you with us. Before we jump in, just wanted to cover some housekeeping notes related to Zoom here. First, a reminder that your audio line is muted in Zoom this afternoon. So if you have questions or comments, please send those questions in through Zoom chat, and we'll do our best to respond to your questions. Also wanted to note we are recording the webinar this afternoon. We're on from noon to 1, and we'll be sending an email notification out with details on how to access the recording when that's available for your review. So again, our topic is economic development financing tools, and we're happy to have our presenter, Kristen Erickson, with us. Kristen is senior counsel with Clark Hill out of their Pittsburgh office. Kristen, really glad to have you with us this afternoon. And if you're ready to go, I'll let you take it away.
Sure, sounds good. Can everybody hear me?
Yep, audio is good on my end.
Okay, all right, great. Well, thanks so much. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for attending today, and looking forward to this session. Just briefly, a little bit of my background. I, as Josh said, am an attorney with Clark Hill. I do public finance work here. I've also, in my career, been in-house in law department of a city, and I've also done solicitor work along with my public finance work. So kind of a variety of municipal-facing work that I've done. So we can get started. My typical caveat, this is not legal advice. If you are in need of legal advice, please contact your solicitor or another attorney. So we're going to talk about today a variety of tools that are available to boroughs to support economic development, to finance economic development in your communities. So here's a brief overview of the presentation. We'll look at several different categories of financing tools. These financing tools are, they can be used independently, but they also can be used together. And so sometimes these financing tools are really effective for an individual project. You just need a little bit of additional financing support for a project. But sometimes they are layered together, and one tool creates sort of a piece of a puzzle for a larger financing project, economic development project that you're trying to do. So we'll talk a little bit about how some of these tools can be used together as well as independently. And the other caveat I'll say is obviously this is not meant to be an exhaustive list of all economic development financing tools that are available. There are many others, but I just wanted to give an overview of some of the types of tools that I see frequently in my practice and that might be helpful to you all as you're thinking about increasing economic development within your communities. So, as we think about the purpose of economic development tools, obviously they're to revitalize our communities, to strengthen our tax bases, and also to stimulate private investment. A lot of these tools are, again, meant to be pieces of a larger project that encourage private investment in our communities, so that it's not just our municipalities or our governments contributing to the economic development, but we're bringing in additional private entities to support our communities. So first, we're going to talk about assessment-based funding sources. And these are types of sources that are, if you're looking to create a pot of money, an actual funds to use for whatever economic development purpose you're looking to do. And so there are sort of two things that you can do with these types of assessment-based sources. One is sort of thinking about, is there one sort of big project that you're looking to fund right now, and you need a pot of money to do that? And in that case, what you might think about doing is issuing some kind of debt, whether bonds or a note or something like that. And then, so you get your sort of pot of money up front to create your project, and then putting in place assessments that then go to pay debt service over the course of that loan or those bonds. Alternatively, assessment-based funding sources can be useful if you have an ongoing annual cost that you just need some kind of funding to support that annual cost over a particular period of time. So the first assessment that we will talk about is special assessments. This is something that is unique to boroughs, found in the Borough Code, and this allows borough councils to impose assessments on property owners within a particular area to carry out certain types of public improvements. And the amount of the assessment is based essentially on what the benefit conferred on the property is. And so it can either be done, the assessment can either be calculated based on the footage, like the front footage of a property, or it can be based on sort of the overall benefit conferred to individual properties as a proportion of the total benefit. So this is authorized by Borough Council, and as I mentioned before, it can either be used to provide an ongoing source of funding, or it can be used if you incur debt to pay the cost of an initial upfront project. The assessments can be used to pay debt service on the project over the life of the debt. So here are a few types of projects that you can do with the special assessments. Some of your standard public improvements like streets, sidewalks, water mains, sewers, as well as some sort of enhancements like ornamental street lighting, shade trees, those kinds of things. And so assessments would be levied against the properties that are benefited by these various projects, and then the funds used to pay for the projects within that area. Couple of things to note about the water mains and the sanitary sewer systems. The Borough Code does allow special assessments to be levied against properties that are outside of the borough for water mains and sanitary sewers if those properties are shown to be benefited in some way by the water mains or the sewers. So that just gives you a little bit of additional flexibility as you're thinking about putting in any of these public improvements and figuring out ways to finance them. So the process is it begins with notice to the property owners, and the borough secretary has to provide at least 30 days of personal notice to each property that's going to be assessed. It has to be accompanied by a certificate of assessment that sets out how the assessment is going to be calculated, particularly if it's a benefits conferred basis, which is a little less clear than a front footage basis. The certificate of assessment has to include a calculation of how the benefits conferred was determined based on a proportion to the total cost of the project.
Kristen, we got a question in the chat here.
Sure.
I
see that.
Yeah, can they be used for Parks and Rec?
Yeah, I mean, it is less clear in that area. There are some other types of funding sources that can be used for that kind of thing. The hard part there is that it's really, because the special assessments are assessed against properties for benefits conferred to that property, it's hard to sort of allocate costs of a park or recreation for that. So it's more limited to public improvements that actually support a particular property that's going to be paying the assessment. One final thing I'll note about special assessments, like some of these other types of assessments that are levied against individual property owners, is that the taxpayers, or I guess the assessment payers, can protest. So just being prepared and knowing that in order to assess the special assessment against property, you will need to have property owner support. One way that these often function is through a developer-owned property. And you might have a developer coming in or a redeveloper who agrees to have the assessment put against essentially themselves against their own property. And then if that property is then sold off to other, to subsequent buyers after it's been developed, it's purchased by the property owners with knowledge of the special assessment. And so that really helps with, they know they're buying it with a special assessment on it. And so it's a much easier sell than, when you're putting a special assessment on a property that, is just a property owner. All right, the other type of assessment-based funding source that I'll talk about is a business improvement district. And this is similar in a way to special assessments. It is underneath the Neighborhood Improvement District Act, which you may be familiar with. This is very specifically focused on commercial areas and for your economic development purposes. And it allows a borough to designate a business improvement district within an area that is either zoned commercial or that is essentially used for commercial purposes. And again, an assessment can be levied against the properties within the business improvement district and used for a variety of purposes to support the commercial purposes of that district. The borough themselves can administer the bid or can appoint a community development corporation or some type of nonprofit to do so. Frequently, these are done that way, and you see a nonprofit or an organization comprised of the business owners within a particular area who sort of come together and say, we'd like to assess ourselves because we think these certain improvements are needed within our area to, make this area cleaner, safer, more attractive, more conducive to our business purposes. So similar to a special assessment, a business improvement district is established by ordinance of Borough Council. And that can, like I said, that can be done by the borough itself, who, makes a decision, we see our main street and it needs some support, or businesses themselves can sort of come together and say, we would, and ask the borough to establish the business improvement district. Again, notice to property owners who are going to be assessed is required, and there is also a public hearing requirement here prior to the ordinance being passed to establish the bid. And again, property owners have the right to object to the bid. Let's see. So here are some of the types of projects that are available to business improvement districts that you can use your assessments for. First, just sort of general public improvements, your standard ones, sidewalks, streets, parking lots, sewers, those kinds of things. Also are enhanced public improvements. So assessments can be used for things like lighting, trees, plantings, holiday decorations, the types of public improvements that you're not going to get through, the governing body itself, but that a business district might think would really enhance the public's experience there. Assessments can also be used for services within a business improvement district, additional services that the businesses in the area might like to see, like cleaning, additional public safety support through public safety ambassadors, regular landscaping, as well as marketing for the business district. So this opens up kind of some additional enhancements that could be available to commercial districts if they decide to impose this assessment on their properties. And then finally, an interesting thing that can be done with the assessments is actually acquiring and rehabbing or demolishing blighted buildings within the district. So again, if commercial, property owners identify that, there's this problem building and we'd like to get rid of it, this is a potential way to finance that kind of project. to support the business district. Okay, next we'll talk a little bit about tax incentives that are available to support financing economic development. So this is a little bit different tactic from a special assessment or the business improvement district that actually provides a pot of money to use to carry out projects. These are more intended to be incentives to incentivize businesses to locate within your community, or if you have a business that's already there but is struggling and needs a little bit of additional support, or to incentivize businesses to do improvements or construction within your community. So a big one that we'll talk about or that is used frequently is LRTA. LRTA is a tool that allows the local taxing body, so Borough Council, to pass a resolution that exempts from property tax certain properties within a particular area. And the exemption can be either or both on new construction within the area or on improvements to parcels within the particular area. The exemption is of real property tax, and it can last for a period of up to 10 years. It can be in an amount that is determined by the municipal governing body. Can either be the entire, cost of the new construction or improvement, or you can set a maximum cost and you get the exemption up to that certain up to that cost level. So it provides some flexibility for the Borough Council to decide, what amount of tax exemption they want to give and how they can support, how they can best support improvements and construction within a particular area. And one thing about it is, if a property is transferred during the term of the LRTA, the tax exemption stays with that property. So it can be a nice tool to, begin some new construction or new development and then transfer it to, to a new property owner to continue. So the process of LRTAs is that it does have to be, is that the governing body sets out passes an ordinance that determines a particular area that it will be eligible to receive the LRTA. And it does have to be a deteriorated area. There's a finding of blight that has to be made by the taxing body. And here's some of the criteria that the taxing body would look to determine whether there's blight. And once that determination is made, then the taxing jurisdiction can say this area is eligible for a LRTA. And the way that it sort of functionally works is that the governing body creates an application, and individual property owners within the area can apply and receive the tax exemption for whatever period of time the taxing jurisdiction has determined. And then the other tax incentive that I'll just mention here briefly, this is a little bit more at the state level, but can be very useful to local governments as well if they happen to be located within a Keystone Opportunity Zone. There are Keystone Opportunity Zones that have been designated by the state in various parts of the Commonwealth. And if a municipality is located within a Keystone Opportunity Zone, then they have the option of abating or exempting property owners or residents from a number of different local taxes. And I see a couple of questions. So for residential properties, these, yes, it would be for new construction or improvements on properties within a LRTA. And then I saw the question, do LRTAs need school districts? They do not. And that's one of the really nice things about LRTAs is that it would just, the governing body of your borough council can just say, we're going to allow an exemption of just the borough real property taxes. So you don't have to get buy-in from the school districts and the counties. So that also adds to the flexibility available to municipalities with LRDO. Okay, so getting back to Keystone Opportunity Zone, sorry, I'm having a hard time paying attention to the questions as I go. So like I said, Keystone Opportunity Zones, they are allow municipalities to exempt a broad range of taxes. So here are the different types of taxes that you can allow an exemption on. This is, oops, because I don't have any more on this. It can be used for businesses, for property owners, for residents, a useful tool to support businesses within your community if you are located in a Keystone Opportunity Zone. All right, moving on to tax diversion programs. I put the picture of the cake both because I thought it was pretty and also I sort of think of these as the have your cake and eat it too, or attempt to have your cake and eat it too kind of financing source, because it allows municipalities to not forego anything that they're sort of currently receiving. So we'll talk about two different types of tax diversion programs, TIFs and TRIDs, with the caveat that both are probably more complicated and complex and time-consuming to set up than some of these other financing tools that I've talked about thus far. For example, the question about the LRDAs, do they have to get county and school district buy-in? LRDAs do not, TIFs and TRIDs do. And so that does, create just a longer lead time to be able to set up these types of financing programs. So TIF is a financing tool that allows municipalities to essentially capture future tax increment and take advantage of expected future taxes now, and to be able to create economic development projects right now and then pay for them sort of in the future. And so typically TIFs are used with a bond issuance or a note issuance, and there is frequently a developer that's involved that maybe needs a little bit of additional funding to finish out some kind of an economic development project. And so you might issue notes or bonds up front, and the municipality will designate a particular area as the TIF district. And it can be, just a few parcels. Sometimes if there's a developer, you might just do the parcels that the developer owns. It can be a larger area as well. And that area is designated as the TIF district. It does have to be determined to be blighted. And there's a but-for test, meaning that but for the TIF, whatever development is going to happen would not have occurred. And essentially what happens is once you establish the TIF district and you get the sign-on of the other taxing jurisdictions of the county and the school district, the level of tax that is received by the taxing jurisdictions is essentially frozen at the level that it was at the time of the establishment of the TIF district. Then, you might have an infusion of money to carry out some kind of an economic development project within that area, for example, through the issuance of taxes, through bonds or notes, or maybe the developer themselves puts money in. It can be a combination. So the development happens, presumably, and then presumably the property tax increases as a result, and that increased property tax is the tax increment. And that is then diverted from going into the coffers of the taxing jurisdictions and instead goes to pay costs of the project or pay debt service on, if there are bonds or notes issued. It doesn't have to be the entire tax increment that is diverted. It can be a portion. So it could be that, the taxing jurisdictions agree to divert 50% of the increment or 75% of the increment. Sometimes that's helpful in terms of getting buy-in from the various taxing jurisdictions, because even though the amount of tax that they were receiving prior to the implementation of the TIF district will stay the same, sometimes a development actually increases the costs to the taxing jurisdictions of supporting those parcels. For example, if there's new development, it might require additional public safety providers. If there's kids moving into a residential neighborhood that's newly developed, it might create additional, students for the school district. And so, there may be a need for the taxing jurisdictions to, to have some of that tax increment received as well. So, like I said, TIFs are pretty complex. They require a lot, public hearings and variety of processes, but can be a powerful tool if there's a big development that it would make sense for. A TRID is very similar to a TIF, Transit Revitalization Investment District, like a TIF, except that it is focused on transit-oriented development. And so similar to a TIF, it captures the tax increment of a development. It does require buy-in again of all three of the taxing jurisdictions. But it's focused on economic development that is somehow transit-oriented. It is a pretty broad definition of transit-oriented development, but anything that sort of supports economic development within an area that's served by transit. And it's also a broad definition of what's meant by transit. It's just anything within any parcels that are designated within the TRID district have to be within 3/4 of a mile of some kind of public transit, anything. And that can be as simple as a bus stop, like it doesn't have to be a whole, station or anything like that. So TRIDs have a little bit more flexibility than TIFs. They have a little bit longer of a term, or the potential for a longer term than a TIF. And you don't have to have a blight determination. It just have to be, as I said, near some kind of a public transit stop or station. So TRIDs can be useful in areas that are served by some kind of public transit that are looking to sort of improve that, or just simply improve sort of business and general development, in a particular area that happens to be near a public transit location. Similar to TIFs, you often have debt issued up front and to kind of create the pot of money to actually get the development off the ground. And then after the development happens, the new tax increment is used to pay debt service. So next, I'll talk a little bit about debt financing. I've mentioned this in a couple of contexts, and as I said at the beginning, these financing tools are often layered together and used together to kind of create a whole sort of package that allows projects to get off the ground. Debt financing is often used in that way, together with some of the other financing tools. So a municipality can issue debt, either supported with debt service, supported by your just general revenue fund, or, as I've mentioned previously, supported by revenues received through some of these other types of financing tools, through an assessment or through the tax increment from a TIF or a TRID. Bonds are, for those of you who have, who are in municipalities that issue bonds, they are a larger, more complex type of transaction. Bonds that are sold publicly, you have underwriters and you have a preliminary official statement that's submitted to potential investors. So that's sort of your more complex transaction. There are also the opportunity for municipalities to do something more simple, where they work with a individual investor or a bank in your community that's willing to lend money, and you issue a note or something similar that is that is then paid back to the lender rather than doing a full public issuance of bonds. Any debt that is issued by a borough is governed by the Local Government Unit Debt Act, or LGUDA as it's sometimes called. And that simply means that there is a limit on the amount of debt that can be issued by a borough, or I guess I should say non-electoral debt, meaning debt that is not approved by the voters. So that limitation is based on the amount of revenue that the municipality has had over the sort of the average over the prior 3 years, and the municipality is required to add together all of the debt that they have currently outstanding, and it can't be over a certain percentage of that revenue based on the type of debt that they have outstanding. Debt also requires approval from DCED. So again, it is a bit of a process, but can be a useful tool to get, if you're looking to carry out some kind of an economic development project and you need some financing, a big kind of pot of financing up front to carry out the project, it can be a useful tool. Debt can also be issued instead of by the borough itself. It can be issued by a municipal authority or some other type of conduit issuer. So this would be like a redevelopment authority or an industrial development authority or a municipal authority. And sometimes that is useful to a municipality because it doesn't then get counted against the total amount of debt issued by the municipality. If some other authority issues it, it's not subject to LGUDA and it doesn't count against the debt, the overall debt issued by the municipality. The municipality has other types of debt out there for, its general capital improvements. So next I'll spend a little bit of time talking about some of the direct financial assistance that's available for economic development purposes to boroughs, specifically from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. It's obviously not an exhaustive list. There are lots of funding sources out there and grant sources out there. But these are just some that I see in my practice and that can be useful to boroughs as they're thinking about doing economic development. So a lot of these programs that I'll talk about are focused on supporting public infrastructure or redevelopment, specifically to improve economic development within a community. As many of you probably know, because you probably have submitted grant applications to the Commonwealth previously, most of these are competitive applications. They do require strict adherence to guidelines, both for the application process, for the use of the funds, and for reporting, both during and after the grant period. And frequently they require matching funds, whether that be from a private source within your community or the municipality itself or some other program. So they do, the grants are nice, but they do require, a good deal of administration and record keeping and all of that. Many of the grants are also reimbursement based. And so just awareness, if that is the type of grant that your community is seeking, just knowing that you have enough funds to front a particular project while you wait for the reimbursement to come through from the state. And finally, I'll just say, many of these grants are not meant to be a standalone financing tool. They are meant to work in conjunction with a variety of other financing strategies. So again, meant to be a piece of the puzzle. So maybe it's gap financing, maybe it's to support a particular part of a larger project. Maybe you have a developer that is really close to being able to pull off a project in your community, but needs a little bit of additional help to make it pencil. That's what these grants are often designed for. So first, RCAP, as many of you are probably very familiar with this financing source, it's used frequently in the Commonwealth. And as you probably know, it's very competitive application process, and it does require a 50% match. So RCAP is used for projects that have some kind of cultural or recreational or sort of broader regional impact, and they are really looking for programs or projects that generate economic development, generate employment, really bring have a greater impact than just the amount of money going in. So frequently these are, like I said, leveraged as a part of larger projects that need an additional piece to make the larger project make sense financially. RCAP is really focused on construction projects. It does allow some land acquisition and some equipment acquisition to be purchased using the funds so long as the land acquisition and the equipment is related to the construction project. Next, PA Sites. This is a relatively new program that the Commonwealth has put in place. And it's really designed to support the creation of shovel-ready industrial sites, primarily in brownfield areas. And the grants can be either for planning or construction purposes, planning to do feasibility studies, to do planning around, what types of industries might be able to move into that area, and then construction grants, which often are used for gap financing purposes to carry out a piece of a larger redevelopment for a particular parcel. So some examples are transportation access improvements, so providing better transportation to and from the parcel, extending utilities, grading of land, any of those kinds of things that will make a parcel available and shovel ready for an industry to move in. Next, the PA First program. This is a program that's really focused on job investment and job creation. And so it is a grant or a loan guarantee. It can go to a borough, to a municipality, or to a business, directly to a business, that can be used for a variety of purposes that support job creation and preservation. So land, construction, machinery, as well as project site preparations like environmental remediation and assessments. It does require a match, and it does require that there are jobs created or preserved, and so it requires ongoing reporting to prove that there is that job creation or preservation that has happened as a result of the grant. Next is Industrial Sites Reuse Program. This is another program really designed to prepare sites for economic development. And it's grants or loans that can be used to do environmental assessments or remediation, again, frequently used with brownfields to assist in preparing old brownfields for new development for industrial purposes or other economic development purposes. And so again, it's a grant or loan program. Typically, the projects that are funded are those where they know there's contamination, and also where there is an actual purchaser that is present, so that they know that the redevelopment that, is going to occur at that site following the environmental remediation and assessment. All right, and lastly, I'm just going to mention a little bit data centers, which is obviously a really hot topic right now, and something that is certainly the subject of, its own webinar. But right now, it's obviously, when you talk about economic development, data centers are sort of front and center there. So there is a lot going on related to data centers right now. A lot of ink has been spilled about it. There is legislation at the state level, both to encourage the location of data centers within the Commonwealth and to encourage guardrails or limits on, some of the potential negative impacts that people are concerned about. So again, I'm not going to go into detail about all of that. That's probably a topic for an entire webinar. But just as you are thinking about economic development within your community, it's important to be prepared for the data center question to hit your community if it hasn't already. And so just a few key considerations as you're thinking about economic development with respect to data centers is first to think about for your community whether a data center is a priority or whether it's a concern or whether it's somewhere in between, both a priority to encourage economic development, but also there are some concerns. So just knowing what the temperature is of your community in that way and of your governing body is important and important if you can know that even before a data center begins to approach your community. And then all of these economic development tools, or various of them, can be used to support data centers. And so, having conversations ahead of time with economic development agencies, with the utilities, again, knowing what the desire is and, about having them in your community and what the concerns are ahead of time is important. And just being aware of how messages are released to the public about data centers and how things are communicated to stakeholders in your communities, and planning ahead for those kinds of communications is important. And finally, just being aware of, if you are using public financing to support development of data centers, just being aware that the costs to once you use that or implement the financing, the costs are consistent, even if the demand fluctuates on the part of the data center. So just being aware of that. So that brings me to the end. I'll open it up to questions from anybody or any topics that anyone wants to talk more about.
Sounds good. Kristen, I thought that was a really nice overview. Folks, we got, looks like a little over 15 minutes. So if you have questions on anything Kristen covered, now's the time to throw your questions in the chat there. Kristen, a question I had, I feel like with a lot of these financing tools, if you're an elected official on borough council, there's obviously some political calculus that has to go into which tool you're going to use, right? So you started with assessments, and I think something like that, if you're looking at what's equitable, what's not equitable, what do you recommend in terms of kind of getting ahead of that from a PR standpoint and kind of advanced planning, before you utilize a tool? Do you recommend public hearings? Do you recommend, meetings where you invite the public to kind of engage in a discussion to help kind of steer a local body on which method they want to pursue? or what have you seen as in terms like best practices with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think absolutely, especially for something like a special assessment, if you're kind of going in and imposing it on property owners, having stakeholder buy-in is essential. And I think thinking about who your major stakeholders would be in the district that's being assessed, and getting just a sense of the temperature there. And, is there going to be pushback? Is there going to be a petition filed in the court to try to protest it? I mean, I think you kind of want to know what you're getting into before you get into it. And I think messaging as well, if it can be, communicated as, yes, there's this assessment, but here are the benefits that you're going to get from it, and here's why, is a really important message. And like I said, some of these are actually property owner driven, especially some of the business improvement districts are property owner driven, because they recognize a need in their like commercial district and decide to move forward with assessments on their own. In that case, that's great because you sort of have a built-in stakeholder that can help you get that message out to the public if there are going to be other property owners that are going to be assessed as a result. But it is, I think, definitely knowing what you're getting into before you get into it is really essential, through public hearings, through community meetings, and just knowing whether it's going to be a viable option politically, even if it's obviously permitted legally, doesn't mean it's always a good idea.
We got some questions in chat. You're probably aware of the news. There was a court case that was reported last week that seems to cast doubt on municipalities' ability to levy stormwater management fees, which many municipalities have utilized to fund their stormwater management infrastructure.
Yeah.
So I think this is timely. I mean, the question in chat is, could you potentially, in theory, utilize assessments and levy those against stormwater improvements in lieu of fees? I'm not sure if that's expressly addressed in the law or not, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question, and I haven't read specifically what the issue is and what's being challenged. I mean, certainly the borough code allows special assessments to be used for stormwater purposes, and assessments against benefited properties. So I don't know if that specifically is what is being challenged or if it's a different, aspect of it. But yeah, I mean, as the borough code is written, it is a permissible use of special assessments.
Got a question here, Lurda. Could you restate what you said? I thought the county, school, and local government had to be on the same page to approve an application under a
So it
LRTA.
depends on how the LRTA is set up. So there might be instances where they do, but LRTAs can be set up where they are just, your own taxes. So, you can say, we're the borough and we're willing to exempt our borough taxes in this LRTA district. So, it really depends on the situations. There might be circumstances where it is a LRTA that also includes a county and a school district, and then yes, they would all have to approve the application.
The question here, if a borough is looking to finance large storm sewer replacements, is it better to go the route of creating a stormwater authority to set up a fee, or should we consider special assessments?
I think it would really depend on the situation. A stormwater authority gives you some flexibility in terms of powers and in terms of debt issuance. If you're doing special assessments, it would be, and you don't have an authority to do it. If you were doing a big upfront project, your debt issuance would have to be the borough's debt, which goes against the borough's debt limitations. But certainly, an authority an additional administrative burden. So in some ways it may depend on the capacity of your particular borough and the size of the project that you're looking to finance.
Along those lines, Brecca, I mentioned the case that was reported last week, Westchester versus the state school system, where they kind of call into question whether stormwater fees are legal just in general, or whether they're really an impermissible tax. So that's something that we're all grappling with right now in terms of just the general legality of stormwater fees. And so I'd encourage you to check with your legal counsel before you incorporate a stormwater authority right now, assuming that it would be legal to levy fees, because we're still kind of waiting and trying to figure out the implications of that case.
Yeah, and the tricky thing about the fees versus taxes question is that it's so dependent on how the assessment or the fee or whatever is calculated, and whether the property owner has the ability to essentially take action that would change the amount of the fee that they have to pay. Because a tax is like, it's a tax no matter what, you pay this amount no matter what. A fee is intended to be something that can vary based on actions taken by the property owner. So that's great advice to say, if you're looking to do a fee, having legal representation that's very, that understands the nuances of how to structure the fee so that it doesn't become an issue, or who knows where the law is going to go on that.
Right. I'm starting to learn more about these tools. If I wanted to have a conversation about who or how to specifically use them to facilitate a project, who would you recommend? Kristen, I think your contact information is on the slide. So Casey, it might be good to start there, in terms of, like, Kristen mentioned, some of these you can really weave together, whether it's debt financing and then one of the tools on top of them, patch together grant funding at the same time. So I'll answer that one. I'd encourage you to reach out to Kristen and follow up. My council has had different opinions on whether a TIF can move forward without all three governing bodies. Can you clarify?
So typically a TIF, in order to be able to, capture the tax increment, does need the buy-in of the other two taxing jurisdictions to be willing to provide their increment going forward.
And then could any of these programs be utilized for road improvements? I think several of them, road improvements, would be eligible.
Yeah, really, probably most of them, honestly. I've seen obviously special assessments, business improvement districts, but TIFs and TRIDs too can certainly be used for public infrastructure, and often is. So, and certainly, the Commonwealth, I kind of addressed Commonwealth grants that are more economic development focused, but there are lots of, more public infrastructure facing Commonwealth programs as well.
Yeah, Brad, we have a grants page on our website that we try to keep current. Again, it's not exhaustive necessarily, but there are a number of infrastructure related grants that would include roads that I can think of. So check that out. It's under our webpage. There's a grants tab. And you can always reach out to us too, and we'll send you kind of the latest that we have on that for funding. So another good question here. A significant portion of our downtown business district is owned by nonprofit entities. Are there partnership ideas for the borough and the nonprofits for improvements to their properties, which could improve our overall business area? So for a business improvement district, nonprofits wouldn't necessarily be exempt from a assessment, correct?
Right. I mean, I think if the nonprofit entities are willing, to contribute, I think something could be done with them. Yeah, I mean, so I certainly think, pursuing a partnership, something that where everyone sort of has an understanding of what the needs are, and wants to contribute or wants to figure out tools that can be leveraged. I mean, certainly that would be a good opportunity for grant funding. If you have, nonprofits that are doing, particular services for the community, there might be grants available to support that as well.
And when I, with nonprofits, I often think of payments in lieu of taxes. And, with a lot of boroughs, many of our boroughs are county seats where we have a lot of tax exempt properties. And again, that's another thing where it's important to get to know those organizations and the leadership in those organizations and kind of broach that topic on willingness to maybe engage in a payment in lieu of taxes. And so that's something you want to consider, Rachel, as well, in addition to some of these more creative tools, that require creation of business improvement districts, et cetera. Well, I think we got through the questions there, Kristen. Folks, if you have follow-up, again, I believe Kristen's contact information is on the slide deck here. So as long as you're willing, Kristen, for folks to follow up.
Yes, of course.
I'd encourage you
feel
to.
free. My email and phone number are on, I think, the first slide. So appreciate everybody's questions. It's always nice to have questions in these.
Yeah. And this was really designed to be kind of a 60,000 foot overview as well. And, we were chatting before. We'll send out an evaluation at the conclusion of the webinar here. And if there's any of these specific tools that you'd like us to key in on a little more or zoom in on a little more, I think many of these could be their own, hour-long webinar session where we could get into some case studies and kind of do a deeper dive into the minutia of the law and kind of all of the mechanics of how it works. So I encourage you, if you have that feedback, if you're looking for something specific, let us know in the evaluation form that we send out. And Alex, I saw your question about, do we have anything on the number of business improvement and neighborhood improvement districts? I don't think we do. So that might make for a good survey. I'm also wondering if maybe DCED has that information, if they're registered with DCED. I might check with them, but that would be interesting to know how many of them exist in the Commonwealth. All right, Kristen, thanks again. Really appreciate it. Folks, thank you for your time and attention as well. And Kristen, you'll be back with us at our annual conference in June here coming up for somewhat of an encore presentation. So folks, if you're out at our annual conference, Kristen will have a similar session. So feel free to stop in and check that out. So Kristen, thanks again, folks. Appreciate you joining us. Take care. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you for watching this PSAB online training recording. As a reminder, you can find a regularly updated schedule of all our training offerings on our training webpage, www.training.boroughs.org. You can also check out the training tab on our website for more information on our PSAB Plus training subscription program that provides discounts on all our training for PSAB members. Thanks again for watching and for your support of PSAB's training programs.